Boxing is one of the few sports where the biggest and best fighters rarely face each other, so when they do, it's a big deal. Unfortunately though, those super fights occasionally fail to live up to their billing, meaning fans sometimes come away from the fight pretty disappointed. Today we are discussing the biggest disappointments in boxing history, so don't go anywhere. First up, we're talking Lennox Lewis versus Evander Holyfield 1. Lewis came up against rival Evander Holyfield in March 1999 in what was supposed to be one of the most exciting heavyweight fights in recent memory, especially as Holyfield had been telling anyone who would listen during fight week that he was going to stop the big Brit. And it was all to play for with Lewis's WBC title and Holyfield's WBA and IBF titles on the line. But when it came down to it, the fight was quite simply boring. Lewis probably shaded each round, but inexplicably, the judges scored the fight a draw. A pretty dire fight and an even worse decision means that this shocker from the turn of the century easily makes our list today. Do you guys remember this one? Next up, it's Ali versus Liston 2. Stay tuned. After the pair first met in February 1964, Ali was crowned WBA, WBC, NYSAC, and The Ring heavyweight champion. An immediate rematch was ordered, but it failed to live up to the excitement of the first fight, as Ali, who had recently converted to Muslim, struggled to get the fight approved by the big boxing commissions. Ali would knock Liston out in the very first round, with Liston failing to trouble the champion in the slightest. Many people would scream "fix" due to hardly anyone seeing the punch land, as well as there being literally no footage. Add in Liston's known connections to the mob, then it's not outside the realms of possibility that this one was thrown. What do you guys think? We're talking Lewis versus Tyson next. Lewis retained his heavyweight titles back in 2002 as he took on Mike Tyson, who was miles past his prime. Of course, anytime Tyson fought, even towards the latter part of his career, there was a huge media circus around the fight, given what he had previously done in the game. Of course, Tyson was about 10 years past his best, and most people knew Lewis was going to win. However, they at least expected Mike to put up a little bit of a fight, but it simply never materialized. Lewis was faster on his feet and dodged everything Tyson threw at him, seemingly landing at will. It's actually surprising Tyson lasted until the 8th round, but when the referee stepped in, it was clear to see that he had been battered and was a shadow of his former self. A pretty sad end to a glittering career. What did you guys make of the Tyson versus Lewis fight? Let us know below. And now we have Rocky Marciano versus Joe Walcott 2. Stick around. After an incredibly exciting first fight between the pair in September 1952, when Walcott was knocked out in the 13th round, much was expected of the rematch the following year. Walcott put on arguably the performance of his career in the first fight, but simply failed to live up to expectations in the second. Having been knocked down in the very first round, Walcott appeared to see the writing on the wall and simply failed to get back up to his feet, even though it seemed as though he was more than able to do so. This fight was almost certainly such a disappointment because of how great the first fight was. People simply expected a rerun. Of course, things very rarely play out that way, and neither did this one. A massive disappointment. Have you guys ever seen this fight? Give us your thoughts below. Tyson versus Holyfield 2 is coming through now. Iron Mike lost his WBA title to Holyfield in November 1996 after being KO'd in the 11th, but given his star power, an instant rematch was booked. The second fight between the pair took place in June 1997 in what was billed as one of the biggest fights of the decade. Unfortunately, the fight would signal the beginning of the end for Mike Tyson's career, as he inexplicably bit the champ's ear in the 3rd round, resulting in an instant disqualification. Years later, Tyson would claim the act was in retaliation for Evander's continual headbutts, but most people realized that Tyson knew he was on his way to another defeat and was simply looking for a way out. Whatever the reason, the fight is now remembered for the biting incident and will go down as one of the biggest disappointments ever. Next up, we're talking De La Hoya versus Trinidad. Stick around. When these two came together in September 1999, De La Hoya's WBC and Trinidad's IBF titles were both on the line. Both men were also undefeated, and the fight was being billed as the Leonard versus Hearns of the day. Unfortunately, it failed to live up to anything close to that fight. De La Hoya subjectively won all 8 rounds at the start of the fight, before a late charge from Trinidad saw him awarded the victory, seemingly on aggression alone. Fans around the world were extremely disappointed with the fight, as well as the result, and demanded an instant rematch. A rematch which unfortunately never came. This sort of thing often happens when undefeated fighters come up against each other. They're too worried about losing their perfect records and fight too conservatively. What did you guys make of this fight? Duran vs. Sugar Ray is up next. Stay with us. These two squared off twice over the course of 1980, both winning one apiece, so when the trilogy fight was booked in 1989, the excitement was palpable. Of course, Duran especially was way past his prime of the late 80s, and the rematch failed to live up to the hype and drama of the first two fights. Duran had the chance to get his own back on Leonard after no mas, and he was expected to come out all guns blazing. Of course, it didn't turn out like that, as Duran looked like a shell of his former self. Leonard, too, wasn't the same fighter we had come to know and love, and found it difficult to pull the trigger. With Roberto maybe winning a couple of rounds, it was a fairly easy night's work for Leonard, and it was clear both men were past their primes. Incredibly, the Panamanian would go on to fight for another 12 years. We have Holmes versus Ali now. Stick around. In a bid to prove he still had what it took, Ali took on the younger Larry Holmes in 1980, but was forced to retire in the 10th. Many people assumed Ali would be able to recreate the magic he had become synonymous with during the course of his early years, but by this point his debilitating Parkinson's illness had already set in, unbeknownst to most. The greatest had reportedly undergone testing prior to the fight, which showed clear signs of the illness, but no one wanted to be the one to tell one of the greatest sportsmen ever he couldn't fight. They should have, however, as he was battered by Holmes, which wouldn't have helped his sickness whatsoever. Who is your favorite boxer of all time? It's Tyson versus Spinks next. At a time when Tyson was blowing through everyone, it seems rather naive to have thought at the time that Michael Spinks could stop him in any way, shape, or form, which some boxing experts had suggested. Both were unbeaten coming into the bout, and many expected a close fight, but as was so often the case in the mid-80s, Tyson made light work of yet another opponent, with Spinks lasting a little over 90 seconds. The fact that Spinks wasn't a real heavyweight to begin with didn't seem to matter to those who thought he had what it took to frustrate Iron Mike, those same people who had expected Larry Holmes to simply walk through Spinks a few months earlier, no doubt. Do you guys remember this fight? Let us know below. And finally, it's Mayweather versus Pacquiao, the most modern fight on today's list and surely the biggest disappointment. These two should have fought at least 5 years earlier, but princess-like demands from both sides, more Floyd to be fair, made sure negotiations were dragged out for years. When the pair finally met, they were both about a decade past their respective primes, and it showed. The fight was sluggish, defensive, which is hardly unsurprising where Mayweather is concerned, and both men lacked any sort of bite. In a fight billed as fight of the century, neither covered themselves in glory, and quite frankly, the bout was boring. It's not often we would accuse fighters of being boring, given what is at stake, but these two clearly had what it took to put on a great fight, but it simply never materialized. What did you guys think of this one? As usual, thanks for dropping in on us today, and remember to tune in again next time for some more fun and games. And why not do us a big favor by liking today's video and sharing it with any fans of the sweet science you know of. Bye guys.